Well, good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. We're chatting tonight with Leanne Townsend, who is a family law lawyer and an expert on family law issues. And I thought it'd be interesting to hear about how family law is impacted by COVID-19. So, Leanne, how are you? Welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour.
I'm good, thank you. And thanks for having me here today.
Oh, my pleasure. So, people are stuck at home, often, hopefully, with families. And the rumor I keep on hearing is that people are expecting divorces to be on the rise because people are spending too much time with loved ones. Is that something that you're hearing? Are lots of people giving you a call?
Yeah, I mean, I've read that in China, actually, there was a news article I read that said that the divorce rate there had gone up post COVID-19. And I read an article the other day saying that New York City is already starting to notice that as well. So it's only a matter of time before it hits us here in Mississauga, Toronto area.
So COVID-19 is good for your business.
It is good for my business. I mean, I am laughing and smiling, but at the end of the day, I don't consider it, funny or a laughing matter. It is sad that, we do have such a high divorce rate, and it's always unfortunate when people, come to the conclusion that that's the option they need to pursue. But I think the stress of the times and then people being, locked up together in a sense, a marriage that already maybe has problems, the challenges we're facing right now is just putting it right over the edge.
Yeah. Now, are there other issues that you're dealing with? I can imagine there's custody issues during this COVID crisis as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of things popping up. So even though I think I'm going to be really busy when this is done, I'm still quite busy now because all of the protocols with, hygiene and social distancing and whatnot are creating issues between spouses who, often already are in high conflict. And what I'm seeing is that, in some cases, there's valid reason for it. I've seen cases where one of the spouses, isn't following the protocols and isn't taking social distancing as seriously or is having people over to his or her home, and the other spouse is getting upset and deciding to withhold access. But I'm also seeing cases where people are using it to, wrongfully, in a sense, that there aren't issues, that anyone is not following protocols, but they're just using it as a power and control thing to hold, to keep access from the other party.
And how do you rule on that? Is that something you got to go to court over, or is this something the lawyers can get involved in, or what's the result of that kind? Because frankly, I can see both sides of that issue. One where you are concerned about a ex-spouse's attention to detail in regards to physically distancing, and another one where someone might make it up.
Well, we're seeing a bit of everything, and what's difficult and challenging right now, especially as a lawyer, is that we're in a fairly novel circumstance. And so, normally when a client comes to see me and they have a problem, what do? I look up the case law. I look up how, what the historically the courts have decided on a particular issue, and that's how I can give advice. But we're in a new situation now where there really isn't case law to deal with this type of situation. So the case law is evolving, and it's evolving quite quickly. Like, there's already been a lot of court motions and court cases that are rolling out every day. And so my challenge is to keep on top of them all so that I can advise people properly. And essentially what's going on is the courts have decided that generally they're not hearing matters unless it's considered to be urgent. And they put out criteria that, categorize what might be considered urgent and what might not. And the examples of things they put out are, if a child's well-being is an issue, like they're going to be harmed, or there's a serious medical, decision that needs to be made, if a child is going to be abducted, if someone is going to have a dire financial consequence, or if there's a child in need of protection. So those are the main types of cases that are being heard. So if we look to these situations where someone's denying access, again, there have been cases that have been heard in specific circumstances where it's been considered, to be urgent. But it's not generally what the courts are saying is that if you have a parenting schedule in place, you are to follow that unless someone is sick. And then, if a child has COVID-19 or has been exposed to COVID-19, then, all the protocols come into place with, quarantining for 14 days and all of that. But absent that, the main message of the courts is that if you have a parenting schedule or you have a court order, you are to follow it.
What if one spouse knows that the other spouse is one that's not social distancing? Went over to their parents' house with their child for Easter. What's their rights?
In that case, there are cases where people have brought a motion on that basis, and the courts have heard it. But what you have to establish is you have to be able to give specific instances of what the other parent is doing that's not in compliance with the protocol. So you can't just speak generally, well, I think, John is doing all these things. You have to have specific evidence. And then if you have that evidence and you go to court, the court may temporarily suspend the arrangement that's in place, but they're going to give the other parent a chance to show that they are going to comply with the protocols. And if they can provide assurances that are credible that they are going to, then again, they will start to get, access again. So it's fluid. And, the idea behind it is that if this goes on for several months, it's in children's best interest to still be spending time with both parents. And so the idea is that that's trumping the risk of, getting COVID-19, in those two households.
Right. Okay. Well, we're chatting with Leanne Townsend tonight, a family law lawyer, about issues in family law with COVID-19 and physical distancing, social isolation, etc. We're going to take a break for messages and come back more with Leanne in just a minute. Stay with us.
The next topic we're going to talk about is support and how it's being affected by COVID-19.
Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting with Leanne Townsend, a family law lawyer. And Leanne, we've just spoken about custody issues in family law during this strange time. Are there other issues that have come to be during social isolation?
Well, definitely. There's a few other issues, and one of the big ones is financial issues because, as we heard yesterday, I guess it was, 1 million Canadians lost their job in March, and we're also seeing tons of small businesses, that have had to close because of social distancing, and we don't even know if some of those businesses are even going to survive this, and certainly they're having losses and things like that. So what I'm seeing a lot of, again, is situations where you have a payor of spousal and child support, and that person is saying that they can't continue to pay at the rate that they were supposed to be paying because they've either lost their job or, their business has been affected. And so people are withholding support, reducing support, essentially not complying with a support order because of what's going on with the economic situation.
And what do you do in that regard? Because frankly, if I have lost a job or I have been furloughed or I have been laid off, it sounds reasonable that I can't pay as much money as I may have paid before.
It's a challenge because normally if we're not in COVID-19 times and someone loses their job or their business, slows down or goes under, the procedure that they would have to follow would be to bring a motion to change a court order. But right now, that's not considered urgent in a lot of situations. So they're not able to bring that motion. So what I'm telling clients is do the best you can to pay. If you have to borrow a little bit right now, do the best you can. But if you can't, then try and negotiate something with the other party, which sometimes can work. And sometimes if it's really hostile, that's a challenge too. And I say that, once all of this is over, we can sort out, what's owing and what's not owing, or bring the motion to change and have it go retroactive and all of that. But just do the best you can right now. And I mean, that's not an answer a lot of people necessarily want to hear, but it's the realistic answer right now.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. What are some of the other family law issues that have come up?
Well, one of the things I've been reading quite a bit, and it makes a lot of sense to me, and I have, one client that's in this type of situation is because of people being, again, in this lockdown or, having to stay together, people who are in abusive relationships are really struggling.
Yeah.
And the rates are, I've been hearing like the rates of domestic violence have gone way up all over the place as a result of this. And so that's a real problem.
And what's the solution?
Again, it's, there isn't an easy solution because, a lot of these people, the victims of abuse, they're trapped in the home. I'm telling people in that situation to make sure they have a safety plan so that if it does get bad, call the police. Of course, that's always a first step, but to make sure they have a safety plan in place, that there's somewhere else that they can go, whether it's a shelter or whether it is, a family member or friend, if they feel that their safety or the safety of their children is really an issue, and to just try and, limit their interaction with the abuser. But I mean, that's hard if you're living in the same home. And a lot of times victims of abuse, part of the abuse can often be financial, where they don't have the financial means to go and, stay somewhere else or certainly rent somewhere else. So, that's part of the safety plan. So I tell them to, reach out to people who are in that sector, the domestic violence sector, like shelters, and there's social workers, and even myself or other lawyers who can help you figure out a plan. And I've seen people, using code words so that, like, I think even some of the, I can't remember if it's Shoppers Drug Mart, but I've heard one of the pharmacies is, people go in and you have an actual code word that they're using that it means that they're in that type of situation and they need help. And so things like that have been set up, which I think is really good.
And so then if they use this code word, what would happen?
Well, then the pharmacy or the person who, received the code word would know that this person's in that type of situation and call the police. And in the case of a pharmacy, I guess the idea is they would, I guess, have to get their address or some, maybe they're buying, if they have a prescription, they would have their address on file so they would know where to send the police to.
Right.
But that's my understanding of what's going on. And I think that's great because people who are in that situation, they're not always in a position where they can say, hey, I'm being abused, because they might be right around them.
Are police making calls for domestic abuse today? Like, in this time of isolation, it'd be a little bit strange just going into different homes.
It would be. And I think, that's an issue I think the police, are facing and struggling with. I know there's been a lot of police officers who, are test positive for COVID-19, or they're complaining about, being exposed to it or being coughed on and things like that. But, in situations where someone's safety is, an issue, as far as I am aware, they're still responding to those types of calls, but they have their own health and safety protocols that they're following, and, doing to the best of their ability.
And on several occasions, you talked about the courts. I don't believe courts are in session. So how does one get to be in front of a judge? Is that happening remotely?
It is happening remotely. So I always say the legal profession has finally made it to the year 2020 because, we've been I know lawyers who didn't even know how to use Zoom until this happened. They'd never used it in their life. And judges too. So, the hearings the motions that are being heard are happening remotely. It's all done via teleconferencing. And from what I've heard, it's been very efficient. You're given a time, you go on, it's run like very, very efficiently, unlike the courts normally are, where people go and they wait for hours and hours.
Right.
And, I'm interested to see actually when all of this is over, how much of this we actually continue to do, because as I say, I'm hearing reports that it's been very efficient, and it does save clients a lot of money, because normally if I have to go, say, to Newmarket or Brampton or Milton or wherever, my client has to pay me for my traveling time as well as my time waiting around the courthouse. So this particular method is, it's more efficient, so it's saving money. But the only thing is, they're only dealing with emergency things right now. So it's not like the full caseload that they would normally have, which may change that.
And is the judge in his house or her house or in the chambers?
the judge is at home. So, it's interesting, of course, seeing everyone's background,
Yep.
and you are like the judges are, dressed appropriately. And as lawyers, we're being told we don't have to gown, but you wear business attire. And we're telling clients to dress as if you were going to court. So, people aren't showing up in their pajamas or anything, although they may have their pajamas, on the bottom, just not on the top. It's been really interesting.
Well, that's fascinating. We're chatting with Leanne Townsend, a family law lawyer and expert on issues on family law during this strange COVID-19 time period. We're going to take a break for messages and come right back with us. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. We're on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM, or we stream online at www.saga960am.ca, and or you can get all of my podcasts and video casts on my website, which is www.briancrombie.com. Tonight, we're chatting with Leanne Townsend, who is a family law lawyer, and we're talking about family law issues during the time of COVID-19. And Leanne, what are some of the other big issues associated with family law at this time?
One of the other issues that's coming up, and I think we're going to see this more and more down the road once the full financial impact or economic impact of COVID-19 is seen, is that you have couples who are, in the middle of negotiating their separation agreement, or, they were in the middle of, maybe even going to court, and they have a valuation date. So your date of separation is considered your valuation date. So let's say their date of separation was in January, and everything, their matrimonial home, their businesses, if they had a business, all of those things were valued as of January. And now we're sitting here and, because of COVID-19, these values may have gone down. I mean, I'm hearing the real estate market has gone down, and it may go down more, and certainly, some businesses, their value has gone down. So we're seeing issues surrounding, are people stuck with the valuation date, in January, or, is that now changed? And if people are selling their home, or one person was buying the other out of the home, how does this play into it? And it's complicated, those types of things, a lot.
And what do you think the result is? If you had a stock portfolio in January, it's probably worth significantly less today than it was in January, and that's provable. And so, what would be the impact if someone was owed half of a stock portfolio?
Well, there's one Ontario Court of Appeal case that's like from 2009, so a long time ago, called Sarah and Sarah. It's SERRA. And what that case has said is, because in that particular case, there was the husband had a company in the textile industry, and it suffered enormously post-separation because the industry just changed, and it wasn't through any fault of the husband. And it originally had been worth like $17 million. And by the time that the separation was actually being finalized, it was worth about $7 million. And the court held in that case that needed to be taken into account. And what it said was that, like, normal recessionary times and just sort of typical ups and downs, those would not be grounds to change something or to look at a different value. But in that particular case, it was so extreme that with the downturn in the market, that it was allowed. So I think with COVID-19, it's going to be very fact specific and specific to each person's case, and it's going to depend on how long this goes on for. So, if this is just a few months of blip, and by the summer, it's business as usual, then that might be different than if, for the next year to 18 months, as we're hearing could be possible, we're in and out of this type of situation. So
well,
I guess
biggest, increase in unemployment rolls in history, a recession that some people think is going to be as bad as the 2009 Great Recession, and or frankly as bad as the Great Depression of the 20s, and the first pandemic of this sort in 100 years since the Spanish influenza, when ironically 100 years ago in 1919, 1918. So it sounds like it's pretty unusual.
It is. I mean, that's the thing. We're really in a like novel times. And so there isn't a lot of case law for this type of situation because it's unprecedented in many ways. So, as a lawyer, I always hate it when lawyers give the answer, it depends. But I feel like that answer is coming up a lot right now because there isn't like solid precedents that we can follow.
But if my portfolio was worth half of what it was, how can I give 100% of it to an ex-spouse?
Well, I mean, that's a problem, right? And that's what happened in the Sarah case, is that his net worth was actually lower than what he was being told he had to pay. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't pay what you don't have.
Right.
So, I would think in that type of case, in a situation where your stock portfolio's been cut in half and that's your main asset, for example, for the equalization, then, I would think that a court would say that that's going to have to be taken into account.
And the stock market, we've seen what's happened, and some people think it may come back, but we've seen what happened. We sort of really haven't seen what's going to happen in the real estate market as of yet.
No, because it tends to be a lagging, my understanding of is real estate is more of a lagging indicator. And we haven't. And I think that, because I heard like actually that March was not a bad month for like sales and whatnot. I mean, but I think April could be a different story. But I think
March was not a bad month for sales in the total month. But if you actually take a look at the last 2 weeks or 10 days, the drop off is unbelievable. And there's been almost no sales.
That would make sense because I mean, I know myself, the last thing I would be thinking about doing right now would be buying a house or selling mine unless I had to. That's going to be the other thing. I think, if people are forced to sell for economic reasons, then, that's going to affect things too. But it's good for someone who wants to buy the matrimonial home from the other spouse because they're going to argue it should be the price that it is and they get a lower price. And the other spouse is not going to get as much out of it as they had maybe hoped.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly an interesting time that we're living in. Any other issues that have come up? This is fascinating.
I think those are the main ones. I'm just trying to think. I mean, the custody access has been the most common one. That's the one that we're seeing the most of. And then I think, as I say, over the longer term, if the support issue is going to be something that becomes more problematic as people's finances, dwindle more and there's, having a harder time meeting their support payments. One issue that I guess is connected with that is the Family Responsibility Office. And that's the arm of the government that enforces support orders. And what I've been told is that they still are enforcing orders. So if somebody's been ordered to pay, $500 a month in support and it was being garnished from their wages and they still have a job, the Family Responsibility Office is still going to be garnishing that amount. The only thing I've been told is that they're not actively suspending driver's licenses. That's something that they do sometimes when someone's not paying support. And so that has temporarily been put on hold, but otherwise it's business as usual.
Really? So you're operational, you're like all the rest of us working from home?
Yes, like my whole firm, all of us are working from home. And, all the other lawyers I've been dealing with, it's the same situation. They're at home and it's interesting. You're hearing dogs barking in the background or children. It's a different times, but, I always say those who adapt are the ones who, will succeed at anything. So I guess we've all got to adapt as best we can. And that's the other thing, like the technology is amazing. Like one of the great things that I think has come out of this for family law is like mediation and that sort of thing. So alternative dispute resolution, that is still very operational and it's being done on Zoom and being done very efficiently. And so I say to clients, this is also a really good opportunity to see if you can work things out without having to resort to the court. It's like try mediation, try some of these alternative dispute resolution methods like arbitration as well. And that could save their legal costs and, get a solution that perhaps is, more amicable that the parties have agreed upon. So I think it is a good time for people to explore those things since they're still very operational, even though the courts aren't.
Right. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. If people want to contact you and ask you for some advice or hire your services, how do they do that?
They can find me on my website at www.leannetownsend.ca, or my firm website, which is www.b as in Bob, T as in Tom, legal.ca.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it. We'll have to have a follow-up in a month or two and say what actually happened with all these impacts.
Yeah, the post-COVID interview.
I think that would be interesting, because it's going to be interesting to see, if the stock market portfolios stay down, if housing prices, which I predict go down, stay down, if unemployment is high for a while, which regrettably I think is going to happen. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I had a money manager on who thinks it's going to be an L-shaped recovery, not a V, not a U, but an L-shaped recovery. It's going to be a long time, and that the government's going to have to come in with huge fiscal stimulus to get us out of this, bigger than what we had coming out of the 2009 Great Recession. So, who knows what's going to happen, but we'll see. And unquestionably, we only know one thing. This is going to be good for your business.
Yes, definitely.
Well, good luck. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour for night. We've had Leanne Townsend, who is a family law expert and lawyer, chatting with us about the family law issues in COVID-19. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Good night.